Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables. And whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 203rd episode of the Simple Sophisticate, and thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. On today's episode, I am thrilled to welcome author and someone who has called Provence home for more than 20 years, M.L. Longworth of the Provençal mystery series that stars Maureen Bonnet and Antoine Verillac. She is on her 7th book in the series. It was just released last Tuesday, the 3rd of April, and we were able to sit down via our respective offices and places in Bend and she in Provence and talk about her new book. And when we did this, and I had the opportunity to schedule the interview, I am not shy to say I was over the moon. Now, I am someone who, when I began reading during my youth, I was one of the many people who read through the Nancy Drew mystery series, fell in love with it, loved the female protagonist and her intelligence, her savvy ability to solve these mysteries. And in fact, that is actually something we're going to talk about in our conversation. What is it that people love about mysteries? And Mary Lou is going to share her thoughts on exactly what she thinks it is. Now, we will talk about the novel as well, the mystery. Don't worry, I'm not going to give away any of the endings or how it unfolds or how it wraps up. But we'll also talk about Provence and Aix-en-Provence. And if you're traveling there, what she would recommend you wear and pack, and from shoes to clothing. We'll talk about the food of Provence. And since she is a professor of writing at New York University's campus in Paris, we're going to talk about writing a little bit and the first assignment she gives her students and how she comes up with her characters and ideas for her next plot. She will also be sharing this week's Petit Plaisirs. She has a couple of them for us. And be sure to stay tuned for after our conversation because there is a giveaway for 3 lucky listeners or readers of the blog. You're going to want to find out how to win not only the book, but a lavender sachet from La Ocitane. So here is my interview with writer M.L. Longworth. Joining me on the podcast today is author of the Provençal mystery series, which features the sleuths Maureen Bonnet and her now husband, Antoine Verillac. Also a professor of writing at NYU's campus in Paris, M.L. Longworth is speaking with me from Aix-en-Provence about the new book in the series, The Secrets of the Bastille Blanche. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate, Mary Lou.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you.
I'm excited to have you on here for all sorts of reasons. With your 7th book in your series, for readers or listeners who are just being introduced to you today, I'll let them know that the first book was Death at the Chateau Bremont. And I want to begin by sharing one of the many things that I was drawn to with regards to your series. And I began about 5 years ago. And as soon as I pick up a book, by the way, I'm done in a few days and I'm ready for you to write another one.
Nice.
They're great reads. But there's a particular construction in your detail that I appreciate. And your mysteries, first of all, are described as smart, intriguing puzzles. There is no violence beyond knowing or learning about the victim's death. And the element of the foundation of the smart construction is the development of your lead protagonist, Maureen Bonnet. And she begins the series as a law professor and as a writer on the side. Now, since the 6th book, she is transitioning into full-time writing. I know primary characters are supposed to be flawed. However, it seems that the primary flaw for Maureen is that she isn't aware of how amazing she is. Perhaps also, though, it's her relationship with Antoine, because he's very dynamic as well, and they're different individuals. But she's strong, she's intelligent, she's feminine and independent, and she lives well. Where did your inspiration for her come from?
Oh, I would say probably just friends in friends in France. We've been here for 21 years now. And she isn't based on anyone in particular at all, but you could say she's just she's a mix of all of my female friends in Aix and in Paris who enjoy their careers and yet are sometimes in a family or sometimes they're single, but they still, if they're single or if they're in a family, they still have time to go out with their girlfriends and have a great time. And they talk a lot about food and wine and books and films. I find that the French are very cultured, and that's something that they learn at a young age, especially in school here. And so she's, like I say, she isn't based on anyone in particular. She began as a law professor in the books because Aix has a famous law university, and it made sense to me that since she's from Aix, and that she can be involved somehow in Antoine Verlac's world, it made sense that she was a law professor. And they would have things in common that way. And then as the books went on, after the third, fourth, fifth book, the characters grow older. And I wanted, I find it interesting if you make the characters change.
And she does. She's evolving, and she's doing, I believe, a biography about Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. Is that correct?
Right.
And so she's a curious individual as well, and she's continuing to grow and progress just as an individual, let alone about the mysteries that she's solving on the side.
Right.
And the mysteries are at the forefront. But the other part that I want to talk about with regards to Antoine is his love of cigars. And I follow you on Instagram, and I know that you enjoy a cigar now and then with your colleagues. Is he in large part, or in this part, but many other parts, modeled after you?
Yes. Well, he's what the French call a bon vivant, or a gourmand. And a gourmand, it's not necessarily, it's not a glutton. It's a nicer word than glutton. He's somebody who loves good food and good wines. And cigar smoking is something that kind of I developed a palate for it, if you will, just from hanging around with friends in Aix who loved, good food and good wine. Some of them are chefs. Some of them are wine sommeliers. And then you develop a palate for, let's try a Cuban cigar. What does this taste like at the end of a meal? It's another taste sensation. Cigars don't kill your taste buds as cigarettes do. In fact, they enhance them, and you don't inhale. As you do with the cigarette, you exhale immediately. Well, the smoke stays in your mouth, and then you exhale immediately.
Funny, I have a great uncle who I grew up with that, and one of his chairs has that scent, and we now have that chair. When he got a new chair, my parents have that chair in their house, and that smell just reminds us of him because it is a lovely smell. Actually, it's a unique smell. It's in its own little special room, but. It's not like cigarettes. And I didn't realize about the inhaling, to be honest with you. But you do enjoy it after a meal.
Yes, or before. But typically it's after a meal. Yes. And it's just a great way to relax. And I use it sometimes too if I'm stumped, if I have writer's block. I'll go for a walk. That's one of my methods to kind of clear my head. Or I'll just edit something that I've written the day before, and sometimes something will come up from the editing process. Or I'll smoke a cigar, and it really, really does clear the head. And my friends who smoke cigars say the same things. If they're having work problems or there's some kind of problem they're trying to sort through, trying to solve. The cigar just does it for you sometimes. I think part of the fact, too, is they take about an hour or an hour and a half to smoke. And so you have to sit there in your chair. You can't be multitasking. And so I think that really helps. It's a real luxury to be able to do that, just to sit and do that for an hour and a half.
That is fantastic. I would never have thought about that. But that makes sense. It slows you down. It focuses you and allows you to focus on one thing.
Right.
And that makes sense. Speaking of the writing process, because you are a professor of writing.
Right.
I am curious, how do you approach preparing? So you're trying to come up with a new idea for your next novel. What's that process like for you? You just talked a little bit about while you're in the middle of a writing book. What is the process? So how do you come up with new ideas?
I read the local paper, which is called La Provence, and it's a paper from Marseille. It's a little paper that people like to make fun of. It has, the local rugby games in it and things like that. But I will read it, and sometimes I'll pick up. There'll be an article on. Sometimes it'll be just something that's happened in a neighborhood. It can be sort of a small crime, something that's gone wrong. Somebody who tries to break into an ATM, for example, and then I kind of. And then he gets caught. It's often kind of quirky stuff like that, and it'll sometimes give me an idea for a mystery. But mostly, what I do is I also ask questions. I meet with my friends, and it's just sometimes over dinner parties where people are talking about the mayor of X or something that's happened in X. So it's just kind of listening and asking questions. But also, I sort of start by I go to the store when I'm about to start a new book, and I buy some notebooks. And I start with the characters, and I start writing down their names. I really like choosing names. Sometimes I get them from the phone book. Sometimes it can be an old-fashioned first name that I really like, and then I find a nice-sounding last name that goes with it. And then I fill up the notebook with all of these character sketches, everything I can kind of think about them, how old they are. Their background, their education, their jobs, what they look like, kind of funny little quirks that they have perhaps. And then sometimes the story, I'll work on these characters, and a story will peek out at me from just developing the characters in these notebooks.
Well, that's fantastic because I was curious because your characters are very well developed. And that's what's different about this book, because we now have he's not the protagonist, but he's got his first person point of view telling the story to a young editor in New York City. So this is a different approach. I liked it in the sense that we're getting that outsider's perspective. We're getting, and it was different, but I was thinking, wait a second. We're in New York City. Why are we in New York City as we start off your book?
Yeah. Since it was the seventh book too, I wanted to experiment with the narration. And my husband was reading Joseph Conrad, and he said, "You know what Joseph Conrad always does? There's always a sea captain telling a story,
And this guy kind of is like that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought, ooh, that'd be really interesting. That'd be fun to write in first person, because I can't write in first person, from Antoine Verlac's point of view or Maureen Bonnet's point of view. It's always in third person. So I thought, if there's somebody, again, like you say, an outsider who moves to X, that's interesting. And then he's telling the story. And who is he telling the story to? And I make it this young editor in New York. Maybe it's because I teach young New Yorkers, in Paris.
Well, I was going to ask you about your inspiration for the story, because you have, and his name, just so I can get it out here, it's Valère Barbier. He is this very successful, distinguished writer who's been around for decades, and he's about ready to write an autobiography. And he's thinking about switching publishing houses. This is the beginning of the novel, listeners. Don't worry, I'm not giving anything away. I won't give anything away. And part of the story that he's telling us has to do with this mysterious death of his wife. And I'm curious where your inspiration came from, because I have to share what's running through my mind as an American. And maybe you've heard this before. What's running through my mind is the actress Natalie Wood and her mysterious death, and Robert Wett. And it's coming back to life right now because she was also on a boat, and so was Valère's wife, and she supposedly fell off the boat. So I'm curious where you got the inspiration for this story.
Yeah, I did think of that, and then it is kind of odd that story's come up again, just in the past few months. I did think of that, and I also thought of those of the '60s and how there was a lot of heavy drinking, alcohol, and I thought of Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, and somebody had told me, they used to have these wild fights on boats, after they. And I thought a little bit of them, but the ghost aspect of it, because Valère is haunted by his past and by possibly ghosts, or in this home that he's bought, this Bastide Blanche. And that came from a story. We were visiting friends near Montpellier, about 2 hours west of here. And they were telling us, we were talking about buying wine together, and these friends of theirs had come into some money from by an odd way. The TGV, the fast train, a few years ago, put tracks through their vineyard. And as compensation, they bought the vineyard, and this family had enough money to buy this winery that had a medieval chateau, a very old chateau on the property that they had always loved. And so they bought the chateau, and it was the mother and father, who I think were in their 60s by this time, and then their son and his wife, who were in their 30s. And the son was going to make the wine. And they were in the chateau maybe for about 2 weeks, and then moved out of it because they couldn't sleep. None of the four could sleep. There were windows that were breaking, glass that was breaking in the middle of the night. There was crying, there was hollering. There was the young man, the 30-year-old man, felt like somebody had their hands on his throat. And so they closed the chateau and they renovated the outbuildings, what would have been, the stables and the barns, and live in those.
Oh my! So what did they do with the chateau? Out of curiosity.
Sorry?
What did they end up doing with the chateau? They
just closed it. Isn't that wild? So we were talking with our friends about this. Would you be able to sleep in it? And it was we kind of daring each other. And so I got the idea. That was sort of the idea for the Bastide. And Valaire's story, I thought, it's like, then it made me started thinking Ghost of the Past. And what is he feeling guilty about something?
Oh, it's been, yeah. And it weaves and it makes you think, wait a second. I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities, but it is a puzzle. And that's what I appreciate about your books. It's a travel book as well. They're all travel books, but at the same time, I feel like I can put down a chapter, even though I'm sleepy and I don't want to, and pick it up and wait a second. She had said this before. I mean, it's not simple because in that regard, but at the same time, it's relaxing for my mind. It doesn't scare me to death. I don't have nightmares.
Good. No. Yeah. It isn't violent. There's enough violence in our world. But I've always loved the puzzle, when I was a kid, just reading Agatha Christie's, and so I love the mystery puzzle. And I think we all do. I was just in Poland being interviewed by the Polish press because my books are translated into Polish. And somebody asked me, why do you think mysteries are so popular? And she said, do we love violence? I said, no, I don't think so, because a lot of mysteries like mine aren't violent. And so I think it's because we love the puzzle, and it's fun working out the problem. And you're as you're reading it, you're trying to go quicker than the detective in the book, aren't you? It's kind of a race. It's a race, and you're using your mind, you're using your head while you're having fun. And I think that's why people love mysteries. At least that's what I do.
That makes sense. And then you do feel very productive or successful when you finish the novel. There's a sense of closure, I guess I should say. There's a sense of closure and completion.
Yes. And then if you miss some of the hints and you don't guess right, you sort of laugh. You're like, oh, yeah. Oh, I didn't see that,
That's true. Yeah. That is exactly true. If I remember correctly, when I was prepping for our interview, you were inspired by the Inspector Morse series in Oxford. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. Because X is in many ways like Oxford. And a lot of people laugh. I remember when the Morris series came out, a lot of people laughed and said, oh, Oxford is such a quaint, small city. How can there be so many crimes? But it's this disbelief thing, right? You just have to pretend that there are. And that made me think of X, because mysteries and often crime stories are set in Marseille, our neighbor down the road. And I thought, why not X? Because it's like Oxford. It's a renowned university town. It has a rich past. It's absolutely beautiful. It even has the same kind of golden stone, and the light sometimes is the same. The buildings kind of remind me a little bit of the buildings in Oxford. So I thought, why not X for a mystery? And there were all these old families in X. And especially these old noble families, which my first book, Chateau Bromont, is kind of based on one of those families. And I thought, oh, those families, they've got secrets. They might not be like drug lords, like in Marseille, which is French Connection kind of stuff, but they've got secrets.
Yeah, and things that they don't want to come out. That's true.
Right.
The other component that I also love about your books is the food and the wine, and we have to talk about that. There will be parts of your book that I have dog-eared and reread just because I love what you're talking about with the ideas for food in the kitchen. So
good.
I appreciate that.
I like to cook.
I was going to ask you. So spring's coming up. I'm curious. What would be a meal that you are looking forward to cooking?
Spring is one of my favorite seasons for the food in Provence. And the first thing is asparagus. And I just stopped at the vegetable stand this morning, and they don't have any yet. So it's going to be. She said any day, any day. So I like the thin green asparagus, and lamb. I love the springtime lamb that we have here. The land, as you probably know, is very harsh here in Provence. And so really we don't have any pasture lands. So it's great for vines and it's great for olive trees and it's okay for land, lambs. So the lamb here is very, very good. We don't have cows and not very many pigs. So I love the springtime lamb and the strawberries. Strawberries, another big springtime for me, just a huge treat. And there are all different kinds of varieties of strawberries here in Provence.
Oh, interesting. What?
Yeah.
Okay, give me an example because I didn't. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
there's one that's sort of long and thin and pointy at the end. And they're always quite small. They're not like big strawberries. And so it's long and thin, not necessarily very dark red. And it's very, very perfumey. When you taste it, it almost tastes like violets or roses.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Gariguette is the name. And then they also have little wild strawberries that you find in woods, the fraise des bois, and those are absolutely delicious too.
And do you pick up those at the market, or do you happen as
Yes.
you're walking? That's where you're picking those up at. Okay.
Yeah, I bought them. Yeah, I buy them around here. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you share in the book, it's through Marine's experience. She says, or she's being described as someone who enjoys or focuses on simple meals made from easy to find ingredients that reflect the seasons. You're primarily shopping seasonally, aren't you, in Provence? Whereas,
Yes.
you're stepping away from the big markets. You have that opportunity to shop year round the seasons. Am I understanding Provence correctly? I've never been yet.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly it. And especially at the market, my favorite sellers, at the X market, they only have produce in season because they're farmers. And there are some sellers who will have bananas, have pineapples and whatnot, and have a huge range of fruit and veggies, and that they're going down to Marseille early in the morning for kind of loading docks, wholesale places, and loading up their truck with vegetables from all over the world and then selling them at the X market. And so I don't go to them, unless I need bananas or, a pineapple, or limes. That's another one. I often need limes. So we don't grow those here. So, but yeah, it is a very, very seasonal thing. And it's the Xwa get very, very excited when, the new fruit comes out from, for example, like the strawberries or the cantaloupes, from Cavaillon. They have to be from Cavaillon, which is a small town near Avignon. And you just kind of get trained to just wait out the seasons and enjoy each one, like our grandmothers did.
I was going to say that they didn't have a choice and now we do, but the flavor is so worth the wait each season.
Yes.
It's definitely a difference between definitely a difference. Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that incorporation because it's again, what we get to know the characters through. And we have Antoine being quite astute with his cooking and Marine's learning.
Yes, yeah.
She is getting quite proficient. She's getting there.
Yes, because since she was raised, that is very much based on my female friends in X, especially who were raised by parents like Marine's who were both working professionals and academics. Well, her father's a doctor and her mother is a professor, a theologian. And my girlfriends who are my age, so in their 50s now, who were raised by mothers like that, were not taught how to cook. Because it was post-war France, and they said, we are liberated. We've read Simone de Beauvoir. We are not, chained to the kitchen. We're going to do our doctorates or, become lawyers or, teachers or whatever. And we don't have to cook anymore. And so a lot of my girlfriends weren't taught how to cook, or they'll do a few. They've got a few dishes down that they can do. But they're really kind of nervous about experimenting. And sometimes it's my male friends who will cook. And so that's kind of why I got the idea of Verlac would cook, and Marine has this academic background, and her mother's an academic, and Marine wasn't taught to cook, but she loves food, and that's something that she'll grow to learn how to cook. And maybe it's one of the, I think it's maybe, I don't know if it might be this book, this more recent one where she's starting to learn so much about wine. Since she's an academic, she'll just sit down with a wine book and devour it, overnight. And she starts kind of correcting Antoine with, with kind of some of his wine, or if he gets something wrong with, about a wine or a grape or something like that. And so she's a good student.
She is a good student. Yeah, that's true. And I appreciate you did actually bring in the book with regards to the difference between their mothers. And that is interesting historically. And that's another thing. You bring in a bit of the history. We learn a bit about the culture. besides just trying to solve the mystery. And you do talk about that because her mom and her go on a train ride to Paris and they go to the library and whatnot. And anyway, that's an interesting dynamic too between her and her mother and her parents.
Yes. I quite like her mother, Florence. I mean, she makes me laugh, so I hope she makes the reader laugh.
No, she's definitely unique, and and she makes sense the more you flesh her out because, as you just said, she was born of a different time. There was this new way of having the opportunity to live, and she did it. She seized it. So I think that's important to look at as well as the mystery itself. So, what I want to ask real quickly, you came to Provence by way of Canada, Toronto specifically, correct?
Well, I was born in Toronto, but before and I lived there until about 1989. And then my husband and I, as newlyweds, moved to California. So we lived in California for 8 years in Santa Cruz. And we came to France from Santa Cruz.
Okay. And when I have to ask this question because I'm curious what your thought process was when you knew you were going to be moving to Provence. What were you thinking? What was in your mind? Were you excited, nervous? What was the,
Yes, it was going to be a big adventure. And we were really excited. My husband was probably more nervous than I was. And the funny thing is he had lived in France before and he spoke French. He's more careful perhaps. And I was just, let's go. Our daughter had just turned 4. And I thought, well, we always thought, it'd be nice if Eva could be raised bilingually, French English, as my husband was. And then it was very odd. We were here in November of '96, and we were on vacation. 1 week in Paris, 1 week in Provence, and he had a job interview in Provence while he was here. And then a few days later, we were in Toulouse, and the company called. It was a French company, and they called our hotel and offered him the job. So, then he has the rest of our vacation photos. He has this kind of pained look on his face because, when you dream about something and then you're not quite ready. I'm not sure. We talked about moving to Europe someday, but here it was being offered to us. So, what do we do? So we flew back to Santa Cruz after our holiday, and we had 3 weeks to decide. And so we decided, yep, we'll do it.
And so you've been there for over 20 years. So he's settling in. You're definitely settling in. What makes Provence home for you now? What is it about it that keeps you there, but also that you enjoy what you enjoy about it?
We love the slow pace. We love the friendliness of the people. How you go to buy bread, you have to be prepared to stay a little bit and talk to the baker and talk to his wife. Then the same thing happens at the butcher shop, and then the same thing happens at the market. So I love that, and it really is a daily pleasure for me to have these acquaintances, to have this daily communication. To go into a shop and there's a smile and, hello, madame, or Marie-Louve, that, some of them have known me for a long time. And so I like the fact that my husband, even though he's a working professional, he gets, 10 weeks holiday. So, and that's something that I could never now go back to the 3-4 weeks. I don't know. It's just so comfortable now. Our friends are here. It's a beautiful, as you know, beautiful historic country. And then once here, you can get to so many other European countries so easily. Yeah, it sounds really jet set. I was going to say, we were in Venice for the weekend, but we're taking Ryanair, so it's and just to carry on, so you don't get charged more. But you can do all these things. Europe is kind of at your fingertips, so we love it. The hard part is that you leave your family behind and your friends behind that you've made.
Do you guys get? Well, I saw on some of your Instagram feeds you did get a speck of snow a little bit this winter. Do you guys typically though? Is that typical?
We could get really just a very light dusting, maybe once every 2 years, once every 3 years. But today this year it snowed heavily twice, at 2 different times. Once in January and then just once the weekend of March 10th. And so yes, it's been the coldest winter that we've ever had. So. And where we live, X is colder, for example, than the coast. Even though if you look at a map and you think, X is really close to the Mediterranean, it is quite a bit colder. So we don't have citrus trees, for example, whereas then you drive to Nice, just on the coast, and they can have lemon trees. and orange trees.
Now, and I have to ask about your French. How long did it take you to, because you went to Provence not knowing much French.
Right.
You said your husband did. How long did it, would you say it took you to become comfortable with the language?
Oh, I'd say 3 years, three years to understand everything, and then 4 or 5 years to become comfortable speaking it. And I still have my accent, which I'm convinced will never go away. But the first 2 years, when we moved to Aix, we moved to the countryside just outside Aix. It was absolutely gorgeous. We had a view of Mont Sainte-Victoire, which is that mountain that Cézanne painted all the time. And but the problem with living in the country is you don't have much contact with the outside world. You know, we drove through a gate and then up a hill to get to the house. I found myself needing the car for everything. So, and then also I would maybe go into X, park the car, and then go do my shopping. Or what became easier was going to the grocery store because I was in my car, right? And the grocery store is parking. And I thought, oh, why am I in France if this is what I'm doing? And you go to the grocery store and you don't speak to anybody. Yeah. And so then after 2 years, we were renting that house and we left that house and we moved right downtown because our daughter was starting school. And we moved right downtown so that I'd be able to walk her to school. And we lived in an apartment, third story of an apartment downtown, which is actually Marine's apartment in the books.
I was going to ask you because you have beautiful views for her.
Yeah. We absolutely loved that apartment, but we were renting it, so we stayed for 5 years and then we left. But that changes your life being downtown because you have to meet your neighbors, because you're hanging laundry outside your windows at the same time, and you have to be civil to each other. There's somebody living upstairs and someone living downstairs, and you're seeing each other all the time. And the thing that kind of saved us was our daughter starting school, and you start meeting other parents with kids the same age. And then on the first floor of that apartment building was the woman who would become my best friend. And she had 3 kids. One of them was our daughter's age. And so it was just up and down, constantly, up and down the stairs of this apartment building. And she was so smart and so witty and so funny. I thought, wow, I really want to understand this woman. I really want to understand. She's a kindred spirit. I have to understand her. So that really helped my French.
Okay. So she obviously knew English. Most French seemed.
No, we were speaking French. So I just had to listen to her and try to figure it out.
There you go. That's a great avenue to learning the language.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really kind of, okay, here we go. I've got to learn French.
It's a wonderful way to learn as you are, like you said, intrigued by this individual, but at the same time need to learn the language. Oh my gosh. Really, that would be interesting. I have to ask, I know I have a broad range of listeners from high school, let alone college, all the way from their 60s and 70s. But I know that there are people out there listening that are saying, how do I become a novelist? And it's not that you had this intention of it probably initially, but you found an avenue. But what would you recommend? You're a professor as well. What do you recommend to your students about the process, schooling, experiences to getting to have that opportunity?
Yeah, it's just kind of, you just have to have the desire to write something. I think maybe you start with an idea and then you just have to force yourself to sit down in front of the computer. It's painful. All writers say it's painful. And you just have to do, I think it was E.B. White who had a big poster in his office on the East Coast, wherever it was, maybe Maine or someplace like that, that said, writing is hell. And you force yourself to do it, but the more you do it, the more you enjoy it because it becomes easier. And even if what you're writing that particular day, isn't very good, the next day you come back to it and you start editing it and you start revising it, and you'll find some little bit that you absolutely love. And then you have that to go on. That's kind of, I can start over and I'm going to use this because this is actually really good out of all of the stuff I was writing yesterday. But I had to, it was hard because somehow I imagined that if you want to write a novel, because I was writing articles when we first moved to X. And, but to write a novel, I thought, you have to have an MFA or you have to be born a writer or your parents have to be writers. For some reason I thought, I can't write a novel. And so I had to get over that initial fear and just kind of sit down and write and try to write in my own voice, and not try to pretend to be somebody else. And that's something that I always talk to my students about, and they work on their own voice. Don't try to sound like an academic. if it doesn't seem natural to you, find your own voice, because the reader, if you don't, then the reader picks up on it right away. Right?
You're so true.
Yeah.
That's so right. How do you? So, I mean, as an English teacher myself, what is it that you say? How does someone find their voice? What's your directive to your students?
Well, I try to give them when they arrive in September, their first paper is a memoir, and it can be about any aspect of their life. And so that, of course, helps enormously, because a lot of if they're coming from high school, they're 18 years old. A lot of times they haven't been permitted to say "I" in an essay. So it's really, really, it's great for them. But then you have to be careful. You can't go on and say me, I through the whole paper. You have to reflect on some other subjects, not just you. Because then the reader will become bored as well. This person just is, talking about themselves through the whole paper. But that's really liberating for the students. And that's one way, I think, to find your voice. Another paper, I have them go out to a Parisian museum, because I want them to use Paris. And they have to write about a piece of art. And not the way an art historian necessarily would, but how that art affects them, how it moves them, how it makes them perhaps think of other things. And those are my favorite kinds of essays, where there's a thread, of course, that goes through the essay, but the essayist kind of can move around that thread, can go back and forth, and then come back to that thread, and then go off on another tangent, and then come back. And so I had them use that piece of art in this way, and at the same time describe the piece of art to us, and tell us a little bit about the artist. They have to do some background, research on it. But it's and that helps too with, I think, finding your voice. And some students will, I never go into museums. I don't like going to museums. And often those are the ones who fall in love with a piece of art, and they just kind of go over the word limit. It's like they just keep writing and writing and writing.
No, that's a great idea. And I really enjoyed your I think it was your fifth novel about Cézanne.
Thanks.
And I appreciated that insight. I knew about him briefly, but I don't know much about him until I read your book. And I recently just watched a documentary about him that was released this last month in March. And I want to go back and read your novel again, because, as you just pointed out, the month that you could see was something that he painted. I saw all those paintings in this film, and it made me that much more curious. And you bring in that history, you bring in that intrigue, I guess, that people are have fallen in love with France for all different reasons, but that's one of them, obviously the art. It is having experience of some capacity a requirement for writing a novel.
I think we all have great life experiences, and so many kinds of different things have happened to any one of us. Yes, I think anyone can tell a story, their story, or can invent using their experiences, invent a totally new story. I think we can all do it. I mean, if we want to, right? It's
because we all see it through, like you said, with them going to the museums and writing about it, they're going to see something different, feel something different, see it through a different lens.
Right.
No. And I'm curious to hear some, directives or ideas or inspiration from you. You are in Provence. I myself have never been, and I'm curious about going here pretty soon. And I know there are many listeners who either have gone or are planning on going or wish to go. So what advice or ideas would you share with travelers as to how to savor Provence, from maybe just what clothing to wear or what clothing not to wear, what not to pack, what to see, what to do, how to go about being?
Right. I'd say it gets hot, very hot and dry. So linens are great. Linen clothes, and of course, just clothes I think that you're comfortable in. The Aixois if you're coming to Aix-en-Provence, they do like to dress up, I would say. And that's something that I learned, coming from Santa Cruz, California, which is pretty laid back. Yeah. And that was something I learned, walking our daughter to school. It's like, okay, I'm going to dress up and, wear nice shoes and a skirt, or, nice slacks and a blouse. And then when I do my shopping, it's just a different way to present yourself. And I really found I loved it. That doesn't mean like I was a Carrie Bradshaw or anything like that, but it was like this new me and this newfound femininity, and it's okay to be like that. It was kind of this permission to, you can dress up to do your market shopping, and that's okay. And it's a respect also for for the others, for yourself and for your fellow citizens, that when you go out in the streets, you're dressed up. You're not schlepping, in tracksuit. So I would say that dress up, but comfortably. Don't wear something that makes you uncomfortable. Heels for dinner if you want. Flats. In the summer, what a lot of French women wear, and I'm kind of in them constantly, are the Tropezien sandals. Those very flat Brigitte Bardot sandals. They're very, very flat, and they have about 6 strips, narrow bands of leather. I don't know if you're getting that. They're called Tropezien because they're from Saint-Tropez. They used to be handmade in Saint-Tropez. And they're flat, and they're super, super comfortable, and they keep your feet really cool because they're sandals. And they come in all different kinds of colors. So the traditional ones are just like, a light brown leather. And I would say just allow yourself the luxury of just sitting in a cafe and watching the world go by, having a coffee and a glass of water. You'll probably have to hassle the waiter to bring you water because they always pretend that they forget, but you just say, no, I want a glass of tap water, please, with your coffee. Yeah, and that means that you can just kind of, you can sit there as long as you want and just watch the people. And I think that's a fun part of being in Provence. Because, the weather, it's a great cafe society here in Provence, and the weather is usually very accommodating for that.
I appreciate the clothing because a lot of the times we think we know and we don't, but coming from someone who has been there, has lived there, walks to the market and whatnot, what's comfortable in that heat, especially since most of us will travel in the summertime, is very helpful. Right. But no, I will make sure to keep asking for my water until I get it. No, just relax in a cafe sounds lovely, watching the people go by. That in itself sounds like a petit plaisir, but I would love to give you the opportunity as we wrap up today to share a simple pleasure, or what we call here on the podcast a petit plaisir, that you enjoy in your everydays.
I think it was the one I mentioned. It's just that kind of that joke, that daily communication with the shop owners. And the joking around, it's such it's just a real delight, because then you come back home with your groceries and you feel good. You feel good about your fellow man and woman, and you feel good about yourself, and you've got a smile on your face. Yeah, you've connected, and everyone's day goes a little bit better, I think, because of it. So that's one of my little petit plaisirs. Also, just going for a walk. I think in Aix or in the countryside around Aix, that's a real petit plaisir. And then, of course, having a glass of wine at the end of the day, that's a real pleasure too. Just kind of allowing yourself, I'm just going to sit down. In my case with my husband, he gets home from work. I've worked at home usually during the day, and so then we kind of share with each other what's gone on. So those are some of my petit plaisirs, I think.
Those all sound lovely. That sounds like a lovely routine of a day. I mean, the market and wine and work and sun and walking. I don't know how it gets any better than that, Mary Lou. It sounds fantastic. Yeah. Listeners, if you are looking for an escape to the south of France and want to solve a mystery at the same time, M.L. Longworth's books are a sleuth and a travel aficionado's perfect pairing. And don't forget the food lover's delight as well. Her new book in the Provençal Mystery Series is available now, The Secrets of the Bastille Blanche. Mary Lou, it was a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed the conversation I had the opportunity to have with Mary Lou. Certainly an inspiration of how to live well without excess, but at the same time savoring what Provence provides, which is so much goodness. Now the giveaway, you may be wondering about how do you enter it to get a free copy of this book. Well, the giveaway, as I said, is for 3 lucky winners. It begins today, the 9th of April, and runs through Thursday, the 12th at midnight Pacific time of April. I'll announce the winners on Instagram, as well as on the weekly newsletter that'll go out on Friday, the 13th. It's going to be a lucky day. 3 winners will not only get the book, they'll also get a lavender sachet, which is currently in my office with me right now. And the scent in this room is just subtle and lovely and making me dream even more of Provence. It's from L'Occitane. There, again, is an image on the show notes, the simplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast203, so 203. But you don't want to enter on the show notes page in the blog. You want to enter on Instagram. So what do? You can get your name entered 3 different times. First way is to simply be a follower of the Simply Luxurious Life on Instagram. The second thing is to leave a comment, anything you want. The third thing is to tag someone you think who would enjoy it. So that would be your third opportunity to get your name in there 3 times. So you have more than just one chance. You get 3 chances to win your own book and lavender sachet. Again, I will announce the winners on Instagram on Friday the 13th of April, and you will get a free copy as well as a lavender sachet from La Cité. Now, a few other things you're going to be able to find on the show notes. I went shopping for you and found the trapezian sandals that Mary Lou talked about in our conversation. I've also listed the first book of the 7 of this series. Many of you have been asking on Instagram, which one do I start with if I haven't read any of the books in the series? As I mentioned at the top of this episode, the title again is Death at the Chateau Bremont. That is the first book of the series. So if you're just getting started, I recommend you start off with that one because you truly get to know the 2 main characters, and those are the 2 characters that are in every single one of the 7 mysteries that she has written. Again, visit the show notes for all this information and a few other things that you may enjoy, the simplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 203. And one more piece of business I'm so excited to share with you guys. Many of the listeners tune in for the French-inspired episodes, and it has been hard to find all of them over the 203 episodes we've done. So what my web designer and I have come up with is if you go to the menu bar on the homepage of the blog, you go where it says French Inspired. The drop-down menu offers you podcast episodes. If you click on that, only French-inspired episodes will be listed, and you can easily see which ones you have yet to listen to. If you enjoy this podcast, and especially the French-inspired episodes as today's was, feel free to leave a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. By sharing what you love about this podcast, you let future listeners know what they'll discover if they tune in as well. And as I have shared in the past, your review may be shared right here on an upcoming episode of The Simple Sophisticate. Thank you so much for your time, for tuning in today. Wishing you a wonderful week. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or pick up the book, Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, A Modern Woman's Guide, now available in paperback as well as ebook and audio versions, which are available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon. And to receive exclusive news as well as an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your weekend, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox each Friday to enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a morning cup of coffee. Until next Monday, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée.